that is a master in cultural property protection in crisis response. The title is quite long, so we have this way to call it CPP. And the master, it's not taking place this year in the full edition because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we decided to organize some talk just to be in contact with our partner and with our former participants and to keep on talking about the protection of cultural heritage. So today we have Sanne Letschert from the Prince Claus Fund, and we have Yara Cianciglia, which is a student of the second edition of the master. And Yara will introduce Sanne and will introduce a bit as well herself and her experience in the master program. And I'm the deputy director of the master, and of course I'm speaking also on behalf of the director of the master, Professor Greppi. And I just want to underline that this series of talk is organized with the Sant'Agata Foundation, and that this is the second talk, and we will have 3 others talk already organized, and probably some other talks in the following months. We will have still a talk with UNESCO, one with ICOM and one with ICOMOS, and we had ICROM. But now we have the Prince Claus Fund and Sanne, introduced by Yara. Please, Yara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, everyone. As you already know, my name is Yara Cianciglia. I am a former student of the second edition of the Master in Cultural Property Protection in Crisis Response. My academic background is in art history, and my professional and personal experience is in art and cataloging field and emergency response. And I am also a very active Red Cross volunteer. Now I'm working at the UN World Food Program as a medevac team assistant with duties related to the COVID-19 emergency response. Regarding my experience with the master, I want to underline what I've learned from an academic point of view and a personal one. Despite the pandemic has forced us to completely change and adapt our activities to new ways. I had the opportunity to deepen the importance of cultural heritage as an expression of people's history and culture and identity. This happened during the lessons, the lectures, but also simply being with my colleagues. So the master course has given me, in fact, the opportunity to study in close contact with great people from all over the world, and thus allowing a continuous cultural exchange even outside the classroom. So I can confirm that it was absolutely a great experience. So I don't wanna steal more time to the host of this talk. So I'm really honored to introduce you the head of cultural heritage response at the Prince Claus Fund, Sanne Letschert. So Sanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yara, for the introduction, and thank you all for having me today. It's a great pleasure to be sharing with you what we do at the Cultural Emergency Response Program of the Prince Claus Fund. And before I go into detail, it's maybe nice to tell you a little bit about my background and how I ended up working for CER. I was educated in art history and cultural diplomacy, and did a master's in heritage and memory studies at the University in Amsterdam. And actually part of that program was an internship in the fields of heritage. And my interest always went out to actually heritage in those most delicate moments in the crisis situations, and actually all different dynamics that come into play then. So how it is politicized, how it's sensitive, but also how it affects local communities actually lose heritage. So I got interested and involved with the Cultural Emergency Response Program about 5 years ago. And here we are now, actually at a very interesting moment in time, because we are transitioning into becoming an independent organization of the Prince Claus Fund. So I'm really happy to share with you our background actually, and our way of thinking, the way we move in the field, and what our most important activities are. And I'll try to shine a light a little bit about how we see cultural property protection from a grant maker's perspective, because in essence, that's of course what we are. We are a grant maker. We provide and facilitate support, financial support for individuals who provide cultural property protection. So without further ado, I will share my screen and the presentation I have prepared for you. Actually diving straight in. Is this working? Yes, it is. Perfect. Diving straight in with a bit of a background of, or at least introduction of what we do and what the essence of our work is. So the Cultural Emergency Response Program was actually established in a direct response to the blowing up of the Bamyan Buddhas in Afghanistan and the looting of the Iraqi museum in 2003. At that moment in time, the Prince Claus Fund saw that was a great need for an organization that could respond to protect cultural heritage under threat within weeks after it was threatened or affected by the disaster or conflict. At that moment in time, there were actually very little organizations doing that, providing that kind of support. So we were one of the first ones making that type of response actually tangible. So in a sense, we are a cultural ambulance. I always like to use that metaphor. So we aim to provide quick help to evacuate, stabilize, or rescue cultural heritage that is under imminent threat due to a conflict situation or a man-made or natural disaster. To do so, we work always directly with local partners in the affected communities to actually implement those relief actions. And we work mainly in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and the Caribbean. We focus mostly on countries where culture is under pressure. And work mostly with marginalized communities. And our biggest aim, I think, is to offer cultural continuity after disaster of conflict. And in that way, we believe we can preserve the world's cultural diversity and also work towards more inclusive societies. So that's actually a bit more clear in our mission. And we have a very strong way in which we would like to address these goals. We really want to aim to create a strong and inclusive heritage protection sector. And we want to, through all activities that we have, which I will explain and detail to you more in a bit. We really want to enable the local communities that are affected by disaster that they can rescue and safeguard the heritage themselves, and heritage that is actually important to them. So we focus mainly on strengthening local capacities to protect and respond, and also making this field of heritage protection more inclusive. So over the past 18 years, we have supported about 400 projects in about 18 different countries. So we have a very broad geographical scope, which also means we have a very large network of people who we work with and who we actually try to connect with each other for information exchange and advice. being around for this long and having this scope, we also have quite a good overview of the field of cultural property protection and see trends, but also see a lot of similar situations of, for example, methodologies that are being used in one part of the world, but could also very well be implemented and used in other parts of the world. So we actually try to connect those people and see if they can help and advise and support each other. And over the years, we also went beyond just funding emergency projects. We developed and invested in emergency preparedness, in training, in creating a network of first aiders, and a lot of partnerships in the field with organizations that are like-minded and want to address those most acute needs with us in the field. Having that overview, we also clearly see the problems of the field, the gaps that there are right now in cultural property protection, and actually the increasing need that there is for this kind of support because of more frequent conflicts, for example, but also for the increasing amount of natural disasters caused by climate change. So it is very interesting to be in that position. And it also actually leads us to wanting to become a bit of a driver of the field, and taking a lead in where we think this field should develop. And this is interesting at this moment in time because it is a field that has been rapidly changing over the past 10 years or so, when actually culture has become way more visible, or in a more visible way weaponized in conflicts, as we've seen, of course, with the cultural destruction in Palmyra, how that was broadcasted and really used as a form of propaganda. And as a result, this kind of heritage support really gained momentum, and a lot of new organizations have entered the field, many of which you probably know. So, for example, the Cultural Protection Fund of the British Council, but also the Alif Foundation, established by some governments and UNESCO. So this is a very moment in time because we are becoming independent. We have this overview of the field and we see certain needs and problems and things are changing. So this is actually also a very nice moment for us to zoom out, to reflect what we have been doing, to really be clear and identify our niche, where we can be of added value, and actually test the relevance of our work. Are we doing it in the right way? Are we working with the right people? So that's exactly what we did. And I thought for this talk, it would be nice actually to take you along in that thinking and to tell you a little bit more about where we see the needs and problems in the field of cultural property protection from a perspective of a grant maker. And also actually how we aim to respond to that. And that's where I will dive into our activities and things will become a little bit more practical. So as I said, we've been around for quite some time. We've done a number of projects, and actually as a result of those projects, we have been able to identify certain needs and problems in this field. One being that despite the growing number of armed conflicts and increasing natural disasters, we see that there's very little capacity of existing organizations worldwide to prepare and respond to these threats. Those capacities are not in place, and actually help for on-site rescue is often disconnected, it's limited, often underfunded, and focuses solely on reactive projects. So it's always after the disaster has taken place. I'm sorry, there's a bit of background noise in my busy street. So what we've also seen is that there's a lot of successive generations that have been experiencing the similar challenges, for example, with seasonal heavy rains or seasonal flooding, but there's very little access to lessons learned actually for previous crises where those organizations or individuals then can actually learn from and build on. That doesn't help that there's also very little pre-emergency training And these trainings often do not include techniques and methods that are suitable for different kind of capacities or people working in different levels of organizations or different ways of heritage protection. And often these trainings are not very well adapted to local needs. And lastly, although we see that humanitarian organizations are considering more and more actually on how to incorporate culture into emergency response, they do not really know what the way forward is. So that is tricky to actually advocate that integration more. Plus, we also see that these initiatives for cultural emergency response and property protection are to a large extent still driven by Western funding, which creates a problem for adapted approaches as well as a lack of inclusiveness. So besides the experience that we had and that we learned from, we also have conducted a market scan actually of 28 different organizations that are active in the field of heritage protection. These organizations work mostly in the global south and all aim to fund projects that are actually enabling actors to protect their heritage. And we zoomed in specifically on 7 of those organizations who are working specifically in that field of emergency relief. So either just before, right at or right after the disaster. And we analyzed how they allocate funding, what kind of heritage they support, but also who they are working with. And I wanted to share with you the most important conclusions, as they have been quite guiding in formulating our way forward. So one of the findings was that actually only 22% of the market is focusing on acute emergency response. So that's implemented by those 7 partners. And that's only 31 million of the 140 million available on an annual basis to invest in cultural property protection on an international level. Not only that, but also the largest part of this funding available focuses mostly on emergency response after conflict, and specifically in the MENA region, which means that only 30% is actually focused on emergency response after natural disasters, which is quite little if you consider how much those are actually happening in the world that we currently live. And lastly, which was for me the most urgent finding actually, is that local communities actually have very little access to funding to safeguard heritage that is important to them. So most of this funding is still implemented by Western organization or collaboration with Western organizations, and focuses mostly on heritage that is either of World Heritage class or really internationally recognized, and not that much is available for heritage of community value. So with these findings, we of course wanted to respond with our programming, and quite of a good conclusion was actually that we're on the right track already. In our focus and activities, we already try to address those needs. For example, we were already only working with local communities and local actors to protect heritage as of local importance. So we are already operating in some kind of niche, because we also included natural disasters, not only conflict. So based on it, we just want to focus more and to be more vocal about it actually. So we identified some issues that we definitely want to respond and continue to respond to. Because the most important conclusion is, of course, that then local communities have actually very limited possibilities to resolve their emergencies, especially caused by natural disaster, in an era where climate change, of course, is more and more affecting exactly these communities. So what we aim to do is that we really want to strive to a better preparation of stakeholders in the regions, so they can actually effectively respond to disaster and also support them in the recovery, especially when those local communities' livelihoods are very much connected to these heritage sites. And even if the importance of local cultural heritage is recognized, we also saw that there's often not really an infrastructure to respond. So we also want to address that and make sure that there's in the region an infrastructure to respond to cultural emergencies. With the given that then the disadvantaged communities are hit disproportionately, we also want to focus specifically on those communities who do not have, in that sense, a seat at the table yet. And we also want to make sure that there's funding available for independent or individual organizations, so people can actually respond themselves. So this is still quite of course, on a strategic level, and I would like to take you through the different activities that we have at the Cultural Emergency Response Program, through which we aim to address these issues. So this is a brief overview, and I would like to highlight every single one of them and tell you a bit of our thinking behind it. So first is, of course, our acute cultural relief actions, our cultural ambulance function. Then we have the cultural first aid trainings and leadership training. We've also developed regional cultural emergency hubs, about which I would like to tell you. And we are investing more and more in thought leadership, advice, and making the case. So the first one I would like to discuss with you is actually what we're most known for. This is our acute emergency relief support. This is an ongoing emergency program we have. It's open all year long, and everyone can always apply in case of that urgent situation that they need our support. In addition to that, we also have specific calls which focus on documentary heritage and on emergency preparedness before, and those are open for a specific period in time. But in all those projects, we work according to a couple of standard criteria, actually, which qualify these projects as acute relief. So the imminency of the threat, so actually the urgency of the need, is a very important criterion. So what can we do at this moment in time to prevent any further damage? As I already mentioned, we always want to work in direct collaboration with local partners. And this is because we believe that they know best how to address the needs, not only because they know what the context best, but also which methodologies to use, but also what sensitivities to take into account. So we want to make sure in that way that the response is really facilitated in a way that is working from them and also can offer that continuity through the project. We can only support the first aid. So like the ambulance, we're not taking care of the entire solution, not the complete recovery. This means we only focus on stabilization, evacuation, or immediate documentation, that kind of first actions you can take to prevent further damage at that moment in time. That is also because we feel that in that very moment the largest difference can be made, and we want to keep advocating for that. So our procedure is also quite thorough. We work really closely with the applicants to actually answer all their questions and to formulate the best response possible, and also to connect them in the process with other experts in the field who could be giving them advice or could be helping in the project. And we also conduct an extensive research before we approve the support for every project. So we do an analysis of the context. We really look into what different issues are at play, and we always consult external advisors from the field to do that. So we ask them to give their opinion about the relevance, about the urgency, the sustainability of the project, but we also check in with them if the organization applying or the individual applying is actually well equipped to do this task, or if they need extra support. So to give you an example of what this could look like, I wanted to tell you a little bit about one of the most recent emergency response actions we coordinated. We responded to the Bedroot Explosion last year. And of course, you all know that this was a very devastating explosion located at the port, which was quite centrally located in the city, and actually in the areas where most of the cultural institutions of the city were located. Of course, Lebanon was already going through the pandemic crisis and economic crisis, so we thought it would be incredibly difficult for them to recover from this. And crucial though that cultural organizations could continue because of the major role actually culture has in the identity of a city as Beirut, not only for Lebanon as a country, but actually in the entire region. So we actually responded within a week by contacting all our partners we had in the field, by asking what it is that was damaged, what was the most urgent need that they had, how we could best respond, and actually simultaneously, we tried to coordinate with other international funders to pool funding to make sure that we could actually amplify our impact and help as much as much as possible. So in the end, we ended up supporting two different streams of support. Actually, we worked together with Blue Shield Lebanon for the damage assessment of many cultural heritage sites, museums, libraries, and buildings. Overall, they mapped about 500 different sites on an online peer review platform that everyone could access and use. So so response could be organized better, and they also provided first aids to those museums and library collections, very basic. So evacuation of collections, but also covering doors and windows, which were mostly blown out, cleaning up, that kind of things, anything that they could do to prevent further damage. Besides that, we also supported small organizations which were kind of falling between the cracks of different funding streams that were happening, by providing small and quick rapid relief grants, so they could actually make sure that there was no further damage, but also to prepare a little bit for picking up their activities again. So in total, we supported about 14 different organizations, and we're still looking into ways in which we can help facilitating follow-up, because of course there's still a lot to do to recover. Besides our cultural emergency response projects, we also actually invest actively in the strengthening of capacity to protect and respond. And we are very much of the opinion that actually that kind of training, that kind of capacity building should be done in peacetime. So that's very much in preparation actually for something that is about to happen. And we do that together with the Smithsonian Institution, and one of those partners actually said that the time to share business cards is not really when you're standing in front of a burning building. And that's actually exactly what we try to address through the training initiatives that we have developed. ICROM was also involved in that, so you probably hear more about that further down in the talk series. But we developed a first aid training for cultural heritage rescuers to provide first aid to heritage in times of crisis. And this is a 3-week hands-on course, which really teaches participants not only how they should actually handle the heritage that is affected, but also how to negotiate access to a site after disaster, etc. And through those trainings, we actually also want to develop a global network of experts who can facilitate quick response whenever and wherever needed. And over the years, we've seen this training grow and develop, and we are realizing more and more this is actually crucial knowledge, this hands-on knowledge in the sector. So we actually are looking into ways of making this more widely available. So we've developed a handbook and a toolkit, and also an online platform on which we try to connect all those first aiders so they can more easily find each other and consult each other in case of they need advice in an urgent situation. And building on that, we also developed a leadership course for cultural heritage stewards who work in challenging circumstances, also together with the Smithsonian Institution. And this is targeted at people who, for example, previously did a first aid course, but also project partners of ours and other heritage stewards who have a leadership position in their organization. And this module really focuses on how they can make their organization more sustainable, so fundraising and networking in the heritage protection fields, but also how they can make the case better for cultural first aid within their organization or in their own region with their own governments. So this really has the objective, both training courses to strengthen local capacity to respond, but also to create those adapted approaches of training. So training in the one country might look very different because it has mostly to respond to natural disaster than a training in a country that is mostly dealing with conflicts. And that networking aspect is also very important to actually have deployable teams in countries that can protect whenever needed and work together. And this also attributes to our aim to integrate culture more actually in existing response mechanisms. So we feel that heritage should be part of this response phase and not only be considered in post-conflict or post-disaster recovery phases. And to build on that and advocate for it further, we also developed an initiative of regional hubs for cultural emergency response, through which we really strive to pluralize and decentralize emergency aid for cultural heritage. And based on our experience, actually, because we really see that quick rescue and action needed must come from the people who live there and are familiar with what the community feels is important. So actually bringing the emergency response to those people is the main aim of these regional hubs. And we want to develop them as regional knowledge centers by providing training, but also really attribute to the advocacy in the region and integrating more in existing policies. So we work with existing CER partners actually to realize this, who are already have quite a good network in the field, a good track record and quite a high potential for leadership in the field. And we have one in Guatemala now, about which I will tell you a bit more in a bit, and also one in the Balkan region, and we're developing other regional centers all over the world actually. So what is it exactly that those hubs then focus on in their own region to actually become and be able to manage emergency response from the region? We really help them and mentor them so they can put cultural emergency relief more on the national agenda for emergency response. So really striving towards that better integration of heritage in emergency relief in the very region. Also at those hubs, there's actually a mechanism developed that they can provide rapid response if needed. So have their own budget to respond in case of a crisis situation, and being there already, of course, enables them to be faster and also deliver a more tailor-made response. Also, we invest in mapping and determining really what is important in that region for communities to protect. So they map vulnerable sites, for example, so better adapted solutions can be offered. And actually give the local communities a voice in what is exactly protected. So by knowing that, it's easier to focus that response as well. And also, we really want them to become that knowledge center in the region. So the hub is the one having the technical capacity to respond, and they can also work together with other emergency workers to help integrating that response in their integrating culture in their response, but also tap into the expertise of that worldwide network of first aiders and other hubs. And this our hub in Guatemala already made that quite concrete. So we developed that hub in 2018, late 2018. So they've been going on for quite some time already, and they directly serve the 8 surrounding countries in the region. They can reach it within a few days. So that's among others Mexico, but also Belize, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And he's actually also venturing out a little bit more to the Caribbean region. And of course, we selected this location because Latin America is actually one of the regions affected most by climate change and exposed increasingly by natural disasters. Guatemala, of course, on its own has many tropical storms, volcano eruptions, earthquakes. So we felt that having direct response on site was very much of added value. So what does this hub exactly then do? They organized a regional course, a regional first aid course adapted to those issues at hand. They coordinate local response efforts. So last year they responded, for example, to a flood in the National Library of El Salvador to help safeguarding the collection. But also they are really busy with networking and advocating for the importance of cultural rescue in the region, and also trying to integrate that more in policies and making sure that policymakers integrate it more. And also they are this go-to center in the field for expertise. So they developed a lot of talks, a lot of training initiatives, not only for first aiders, cultural first aiders, but also, for example, for firefighters in the region, but also for employees of the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, etc. So we realized only that actually making that case for the better integration of culture in response mechanisms there, and contributing to that advocacy, there were some challenges, because at large this is not an easy thing to do for us as well, and as a field. And seeing this gap, we also realized that we ourselves could actually contribute better to that, and actually making that case. So our last focus area that I wanted to discuss with you is actually that we want to invest more in data collection and dissemination, and actually illustrating the impact of cultural property protection. So really making clear why it is so important that cultural heritage is protected, especially in those crisis situations. Why is it so important that we do what we do? Because speaking to you in a group related and interested in heritage protection, it's very easy for us to explain why it is so important, but it's very difficult to actually explain that to people who are not working in this field. And that's something we've been noticing more and more. For example, policymakers, but also organizations working in the humanitarian fields really are asking for data on the impact of the work that we do. So what is cultural property protection in those crucial situations? What kind of difference is it making for actually local communities that have been affected, their recovery after disaster or conflict, but also on adjacent fields such as peace building and reconciliation. So what we really want to do is actually being louder about the impact of our work and taking a lead in illustrating what kind of impact it has. So we aim to start up an impact analysis research actually of projects that we have supported. And in that sense, we have the luxury of going back in, being able to go back in time for about for 10 years, and we can look back what happened after those projects and what difference it made. And actually try to come up with some data that can back up what we do and actually help us make the case. Because in the end, we really want to, of course, make sure that there's better policies on heritage protection, but also that there's more funding available for it, which is a direct consequence of that. So we actually need to see how we can frame heritage protection as a humanitarian issue. So it will be better integrated in the response mechanisms after conflict and disaster. So that's actually where I want to conclude my talk and what I wanted to share with you. And I hope I've been able to give you an insight in what a grant maker's perspective is actually on cultural property protection, and how we support individuals and organizations to do that actually through emergency projects, but also training the regional hubs, and that we want to be louder and make a case on why it is so important that we do what we do. And of course, we're becoming an independent organization as of January 2022. And that with that independent organization, we really want to strive towards a stronger and more inclusive heritage protection sector in which local actors are in the leads to protect cultural heritage that is important to them. So I hope this was useful and inspired you in some way. Really, I would recommend you to stay in touch. I've included the general email address of our program there. And if you want to follow what we do, but also news about our independence and everything that we are embarking on, I would recommend you to keep an eye on the Prince Claus Fund website, on which we will announce all our development of our own website and new social media channels. And of course, I understand if there are questions, and I'm very happy to answer them now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sanne. Thanks a lot for all this overview. And yeah, absolutely, definitely, it is extremely helpful to our work, since this field of protecting cultural properties or working, let me say, in the cultural field, just to enlarge a little bit the view, is so huge and so complex, as it was very clear from some of the cases and some of the open questions that you were posing, which are also our questions. So it is very interesting to learn how the CER, the Cultural Emergency Response Program, is becoming an independent organization, is in the process of becoming an independent organization. This is also very interesting to us to learn and understand and see how it will happen. So we are very interested and curious, and of course open to collaborate through this master and to all other our other activities in this field. I was collecting a couple of curiosities, so I'm gonna pose you a couple of questions, which are how your work, if and how your work was affected by the, let's say, the general emergency caused by the pandemic in the very last year. So this is a first question, which is, of course, I guess, pretty much related also to your goal in augmenting the efficiency, the capacity of providing support to cultural organizations and to local communities. But anyway, this is a first question. If you want to reply, please.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yes, of course. Unfortunately, our work was also very much affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would say not so much our work as was our partners' work. Of course, you can imagine that because of the lockdown situations, of health measures that had to be taken into account, many projects were affected and delayed. We realized that many of our partners were actually very much dependent on project funding. So if that project funding falls away, which happened because a lot of grant makers had to suspend their activities, there was very little left for them, and they were also covering their operational costs for them. So one consequence, for example, is that that we realized that those more structural support for organizations that are crucial in their regions is very important to be able to continue their work. Of course, conflicts and disasters did not really take COVID into account, and they kept on happening. So we luckily were still able to respond in collaboration with some partners to those kind of disasters, for example, landslides in Kenya, but also the earthquake in Albania that happened a little bit earlier. But then in those projects, we tried to adapt them so we could still facilitate and do them, taking into account all conditions that needed to be in place to be able to work in the health crisis. And luckily, together with the Alif Foundation, we were also able to offer some relief support for some of those organizations that have such an important role in the region for cultural heritage protection. And that was really focused on offering a support in those operational costs, but also finding alternative ways of keeping working on site, training, still connecting with everyone that was being trained and actually working on site. So luckily we were able to adapt a little bit to that. But in conclusion, I must say that I'm afraid that we haven't seen the biggest impact yet of this pandemic, and I'm really in touch with many of our partners to see how it's affecting them now and actually after the pandemic is over, because I expect that there will be the biggest challenge, and we try to move with that.
Yeah, this is pretty. I mean, this is clear, and let me say that I agree on this very last point, because the feeling, also based on the estimations that we are reading and learning and seeing by also direct experience, is that the effects, the real effects, are still have to come.
Yeah.
Especially affecting, and this is also our experience. Yes, the cultural organization, especially the smaller ones. And I was asking this also because we are involved in facing exactly the same questions, but I think everybody working in this field, in the cultural field, which we know is has special features and special fragilities already before the emergencies coming. Let me ask also this other question, which is a big one, but let me try. So, also because we are talking about cultural heritage, but in the end, you were talking about cultural diplomacy, politics, communities, valorizing heritage. So this is an entry point, but of course the final goal is much larger than this. And I'm very pleased to see that among our followers today, we have also some participants of our other master in World Heritage and Cultural Projects for Development, and of our Heritage Beyond Walls program that you know well already. So the question is, let me say it in this way: what's the expected priority in the following years to concentrate efforts, energies, investments, even in financial and economic terms, because the feeling is that probably we all have to enforce alliances and enforce yes, and concentrate the effort rather than spreading. So what's your opinion on this?
That is indeed a large question, and I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. But I think in relation with what you the context that you just framed is that our main focus is really on offering cultural continuity, because we realize very much that what we do goes far beyond just protecting the actual heritage site or collection, and it really makes a difference also in a recovery after disaster. And that's of course also related to economic aspects, as it is a point of revenue for many communities, and they can really build from that. So it is in that sense, of course, very much developed related to the field of development as well. I'm also interested in what you said about coordinated efforts and focusing that, because I think we should really try to find partnerships in making actually the impact of what we do larger. So not only grant makers should work better together, but also governments and grant makers, everyone's actually involved in this field of heritage protection could actually step up in focusing support a little bit more. I think you're seeing a bit of a trend of that already. For example, in the recovery of Mosul, where a lot of parties are coming together, international organizations such as UNESCO, but of course a lot of governments are contributing there as well as a lot of expert organizations. So that might become a very interesting case study for us to look at.
Yeah, that's true, and that's very interesting to learn from that experience. We have another more specific question from Jamaica, is in relation to the threat coming from the current volcanic eruptions affecting some of the wooded properties in the Caribbean. So, what kind of recommendation may we adopt? Is the question.
Sorry, what kind of recommendation? I'm also reading it.
What kind of recommendation may we adopt for protecting in this situation?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because we actually already are in touch with quite a lot of our partners located in the area that's been affected by the volcanic eruption. And what we're doing now, and what our partners are doing now, is actually identify what the damage is. Which in many cases is also not that obvious, because volcanic ash is in the first place very obvious, of course, where it leads to. But for example, we're working with quite a lot of documentary heritage institutions, which are facing really big challenges of protecting their collection now from the infiltration of those ashes and damaging their collections. So we're first assessing damage, then identifying priorities. We're also talking to a lot of experts who have similar experiences. For example, our hub in Guatemala is an expert in what to do with volcanic ashes. So we're trying to connect him to some partners of ours in the region. And if organizations are interested in that kind of support, either just the experience that we can share or the experts we can connect you to, and maybe leading to a first aid project if necessary, that's something we could do.
That's very good to know. And let me say thank you for these answers, also for your presentation. Actually, the scope of these talks is also to somehow facilitate the creation of connections, which is, I know, very close to your work, and let me say also to my work in general. And which is so critical, especially now, because challenges are becoming so huge that we cannot think to face them alone, or not establishing real alliances, real concrete partnerships. So it was very inspiring. It will be very useful also in the future for us, getting inspiration from this presentation and from your institution expertise. So again, we are concluding here this session. A big thank you. It was great. And let me conclude by not really announcing, but telling to our friends and audience that we are planning for June a short summer school on heritage crimes and emergencies. And I'm very confident that for the next talk, which will take place on May 7, we could provide all the details related to this new initiative. Of course, we are very open to collaborate with you, Sanne, with your colleagues, and with all of you working in this field. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.